Welcome to the Christ and Classics podcast, where we consider the classics in light of the Christ. I'm Colton Moore.
And I'm Devin Wilkins.
And this is episode 4, the Iliad Book 3.
The plot thickens.
The plot thickens. Devin, take us away.
All right. Well, let me just summarize the book here at the beginning, and then maybe you can ask the opening question, Colton.
Sounds great.
So we've got the Trojans and the Achaeans marching out to one another to fight. And as they do, Paris, he jumps out ahead and he challenges the Achaeans to a 1-to-1 combat instead of an all-out return to war. And Menelaus eagerly volunteers. And Paris, as a result, cowardly retreats back into the ranks of the Trojans, kind of running away. And then Hector rebukes his brother for his cowardice outright. And Paris he retracts his cowardly retreat and decides, you know what? No, I will fight. And then Menelaus, he will fight Menelaus in a duel, mano a mano. And so Hector announces this to both armies, and Menelaus accepts. And he wants peace, and so they decide that they're going to have Priam come and shake on it.
Did you just say Priam?
Isn't it Priam? Or you say Priam?
I say Priam.
I say Priam. I'm sorry.
Oh gosh, we're gonna run into all these pronunciation problems as we go along. All right, progress.
What does Fagel say in the pronunciation guide?
I read the whole introduction and then I just skimmed through the pronunciation stuff because it was really technical, and I thought I just want to read this thing. Okay, keep going.
All right. So basically, the idea is whoever wins the duel gets the girl and all of her wealth, and if the Trojans win, then the Greeks got to get out of Dodge. And if the Greeks win, then the Trojans have to cough up Helen, but then also they have to pay reparations, which is interesting. But they are eager for the war to be over. And so Helen is actually informed of all this by the goddess Iris. And she tells Helen to look upon both armies out in the battlefield. She says, think of it. Paris and Menelaus, loved by Ares, go to fight out in their rugged spear, or with their rugged spears, all for you. And the man who wins that duel, you'll be called his wife.
Oh, have you ever seen, did you see the movie Moana?
I did, yeah.
And do you remember when Maui goes is whispering into Moana's ear, and like she does it later on, and it's like, "You're so amazing." You remember that thing? So right, when I read this section, I picture Aphrodite in Helen's ear. Think of it, Paris and Menelaus, loved by Ares. They go to fight it out with the rugged spears, all for you. And the man who wins that duel, you'll be called his wife. It's just like, oh gosh, and she's like, oh really? Anyways, sorry.
No, you're good. So, you would think that maybe the prospect of this fight would scare Helen or something to that effect, but in fact, she's filled with longing for Menelaus. Fagel's translation says, yearning warm and deep for her husband long ago, her city and her parents. She stands on the walls of the city of Troy with Priam, observing the armies, and Priam tells her that he doesn't blame her. In fact, he goes so far to say, I hold the gods to blame. They are the ones who brought this war upon me. And then Helen tells Priam who all the fighters are, because Priam is actually pretty impressed with the Greek lineup, which is interesting. Agamemnon, Odysseus, Big Ajax. And then Priam goes onto the battlefield. He does ratify with Agamemnon and others, basically giving an oath that whoever wins this, it's over. That's it. And then the duel begins. Menelaus, well, Paris first strikes Menelaus with the spear, and then Menelaus strikes Paris, and Menelaus can throw a much better spear than
Oh yeah.
Paris. Paris is Paris is not doing so hot after that spear, but Menelaus just kind of brushed it off. And then uh, Menelaus gets the upper hand. He's dragging Paris along, but Aphrodite interferes and she snatches him away in a mist and brings him back to his bedroom and says, "Wait here," basically. And she goes and gets Helen and tempts Helen to lust after Paris to come back to the bedroom. Helen rebukes Aphrodite, which is fascinating, and then she kind of unwillingly goes to see Paris with Aphrodite's uh, lead here, and she blasts him for being a coward and
Mm.
shirking the glory of the battle. But then Paris says, "You know what? Let's go to bed." And book three ends with them, uh, doing their thing, and Agamemnon claiming victory over the Trojans. So that's a long-winded summary of book three.
Right. And so like before I've got one main question to ask, but before I even ask that question, I just want to keep in mind that this whole book is coming off the heels of book 2 where Zeus has just deceived Agamemnon, the general of the Greeks, into basically blitzing Troy
Mm,
as a means to uh, well, as beguiling him into the trap of what I think is Thetis' prayer. Like
right.
Achilles is going to be exalted, and as a result, well, he's going to be exalted by means of the Trojans um, killing his own people, the Greeks, and
Mm-hmm.
this is all part of it. And so this is the first battle we see after Thetis has appealed to Zeus, and they meet, and they're about to fight, and then Menelaus and Paris kind of go at it. And what I
Yeah.
find, yeah, what I find, there's so much to think about with this, and
Mm-hmm.
but I just want to focus on um, Paris and Helen.
Okay.
Paris and Helen seem to kind of steal the show, if you will, of this book. And so my question is, why would Homer juxtapose Paris and all his cowardice with Helen?
Mm.
And even in all her what seems to be some sort of repentant remorse. And like for now, let's just forget the ending of book 3 where she actually goes back to bed with her man with Paris, whom she thinks is a coward.
Yeah.
And let's just picture her up on the walls, looking at her old family members and friends and weeping. Um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Often Fagel's translation will have strong words for for Helen accusing herself for her own whoredom,
Right.
and so Paris is a coward, and Hector
Mm-hmm.
really brings that out.
Mm.
We see him at the very beginning. He's the challenger, and he's dressed for battle, and he's ready to go on the front lines. And like um, Homer really makes him out to be something really special. He says, "Where is it at?" Uh,
You're talking about
uh,
Paris or?
Sorry, yes, Paris, and on line like 17 or 18. Paris, he strained from the
Mm.
Trojan forward ranks, a challenger, lithe, magnificent as a god, the skin of a leopard slung across his shoulders, a reflex bow at his back, and a battle sword at his hip, and brandishing 2 sharp spears tipped in bronze, he strode forth, challenging all the Argive best to fight him face to face in mortal combat.
He's feeling good.
Right,
He.
and then he sees Menelaus, and like in line 35 or so, he says Paris's spirit shook, backing into his friendly ranks. He cringed from death as one who trips on a snake in a hilltop hollow. Recoils suddenly, trembling grips his knees, and pallor takes his cheeks, and back he shrinks. Oh, and here's the most ironic and hilarious line. So Paris he dissolved again into the proud Trojan lines, dreading Atrides, Menelaus, that magnificent, brave Paris. So it's like
Yeah,
he's all ready to go until it's actually time to fight, and he sees the guy. He's like, "Oh gosh, he's got some big arms. Let me just kind of
right.
ease back into my back into the
Yeah.
troops."
I mean,
And
honestly, in a very human moment, I don't blame him, you know. Like, I might be feeling pretty good myself, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, "Ooh, I don't know, I take it back. I take it back. I saw the muscles on that guy. Mm-mm.
yeah, and like this whole plays into I think uh, Homer's view of honor and glory that
Mm.
Hector highlights for Paris. He calls Paris a mockery, and not
Mm-hmm.
just for Paris's own sake, but for the sake of his people, the Trojans. And he says, "You shame our people, you who robbed Menelaus of quote his sumptuous warm wife." And rebuke from the other prince, Hector, who's an upstanding man. And I can't wait till we get to book 6, where we see Hector with his little baby boy and his wife Andromache. It's my favorite, which
Mm.
is it's a precious scene,
That's your
and really.
favorite. My favorite's book 24.
Oh, I forgot. I like book 24 too. I really like the Iliad. I really love the Iliad.
Yeah,
Um,
you're an Iliad man, and
it's so good.
it
You got to
is.
convince me that the Odyssey is better than the Iliad.
I
Um,
don't have to do that. It'll do it itself. Come on, come on.
oh,
Um, yeah,
yeah.
you're like, wait, Hector is his brother, right? Because he basically says we'd be better if you had never been born.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
isn't that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
We.
I'm looking for it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So around line 45.
Uh huh.
Would to God you'd never been born,
Oh.
died unwed. That's all I'd ask. Better that way by far to have you strutting here, an outrage, a mockery in the eyes of all our enemies, right? No one likes Paris. No one.
Yeah.
Um, but to your point, or well, I'm not sure if you made this point yet, but somehow all that ridicule from his brother actually prompts Paris to reply saying in line 70, "Yeah, you're right. I'm cowardly."
Right. It, that will appear later on in the book, in book 6, when Hector goes back to Troy, and Hector and Paris is still in the city, and they go out together, and Hector's still rebuking him, and Paris is like, you're right, but watch me catch up with you. Anyways, so so we have this whole scene right here, and then Homer shifts the attention to Paris's stolen bride, Helen. And Helen is
Mm,
in uh, the city, and Aphrodite comes to her and brings her up to the a tower to look out on the battlefield with her father-in-law, Priam, and we get like a second catalog, whereas book 2 is like the catalog of the ships of all the different
mhm,
peoples that make up in this war. Helen catalogs some of the
right.
main characters, such as Agamemnon right off the bat, Telamonian, Ajax, like Ajax the Great, who's the strongest warrior for the Argives, though not the best warrior. That's Achilles. Odysseus is there, and all the while
Hmm.
she's weeping. It says warm tears. She longs for her husband. You get a sense of a repentant adulterer, and she is. It's kind of a heartwarming scene, and you kind of feel, at least I do. You kind of feel for her. It's like, okay, she does have a heart, and
Right,
what's she gonna do with it? Because
right.
her lover boy, so-called husband, is just acting a fool and seems to be completely oblivious to his own faults. And
Hmm.
so the battle ensues, and then Paris's performance on the battlefield is embarrassing, and he's in need of rescue. He's about to get strangled to death by Menelaus, who's got him by the helmet and the chin straps, cutting the circulation off of his windpipe. And
Hmm.
then, like Fagel's translation, it happens often in the Iliad, where somebody's about to die, and then it says, "But if it wasn't for insert your goddess or god, and come to save the
Yeah,
day." And
Agamemnon
Aphrodite.
had the same. He had the same favor earlier in the book. Agamemnon.
Oh, in this book 3.
No, sorry, in book one.
Oh, wait, what am I forgetting?
Remember, Achilles is about to slay
Oh, that's
Agamemnon.
right. That's right. He was
Yeah,
about to
yeah,
stab him in the gut,
yeah.
and then Hera came down, or Athena.
Yeah, right.
Athena on behalf of Hera.
That's right. And you're like, oh, man, come on.
Yeah, yeah. And what I find interesting is that this coward is saved by uh what Homer calls, quote, the coward goddess in book 5. Now, what's interesting about Aphrodite here is that Aphrodite is, I think you might have already said it, seems to be the only one who really loves Paris. Um, the, and the only reason that I can think of that is this common cultural knowledge of what's commonly called the Judgment of Paris, where Paris gave Aphrodite the golden apple, and Aphrodite in
Hmm.
return gave him Helen. And
Which I think they allude to elsewhere in the Iliad. Just it's hasn't really come up quite yet.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. And so my question is, what is Homer trying to communicate to us by um, juxtaposing, putting these two characters in concert with one another when they seem to be in completely different uh, mindsets at this point in their story. Helen is repenting and longing to make things right with her rightful husband, and Paris is still pretty selfish and wants to preserve his own life at the expense of others, and
Hmm.
he's just uh, giving into his carnal passions rather than um, being where he's supposed to be. Kind of like David, right? With David should have been on the front line in battle, but
Yeah.
what happened?
Interesting.
He stayed back and
Right.
committed
Right.
murder and adultery. And long story short, so I just had that thought
It,
on the fly. I wonder if there's any real connection there, but I'm not sure.
hmm. Yeah. It does seem on the topic of Helen and Paris. I'm assuming that they had uh, 9 great years up to this point. But at the moment, you're like, how are these two a couple? I mean, she doesn't seem interested at all. She thinks he's a coward. In fact, it seems that everyone thinks he's a coward except Aphrodite. She's the one who's eager to rescue him, but she she may very well be the only person who loves Paris uh, at the point of this book, anyway. I will say that Priam, he toward the end of this book, book 3, he's unable to watch because he does still love his son, despite the fact that
Right? Yeah.
he he knows that he's gonna die.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't compare to Menelaus. Were you gonna
Yeah.
say something? Yeah.
Um, no, I'm just sitting here looking at Helen while she's on the 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 tower with Priam as she's looking all over the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And Helen is Homer says, and Helen, the radiance of women, answered Priam, quote, "I revere you so, dear father, dread you too. Like I fear you,
Mm-hmm.
I honor you, father-in-law, but I dread you too. I don't like you. If only death had pleased me then. Grim death, that day I followed your son to Troy, forsaking my marriage bed, my kinsman, and my child, my favorite, now full grown." So she's been away in Troy, and she's not watched her son grow up to be a young man. And then she
I
keeps
know.
going, and the lovely com- uh, uh, comradeship. How do you pronounce that? Comradeship.
Comradeship.
Comradeship. I just say camaraderie of women my own age. Death never came, so now I can only waste away in tears. So she's like, she's
Right.
in utter despair uh, over her decision. She's forsaken everything,
Hmm.
and she regrets it. And Paris regrets nothing, apparently.
Have you ever seen the not great movie, perhaps, Click with Adam Sandler?
Oh, no, but I'm vaguely familiar with the concept of like fast forwarding and rewinding time.
Right. And he fast forwards so much that it gets out of control and he can't slow it down. And so he accidentally basically fast forwards through his life. And that's what that is an awful probably thing to think of an Adam Sandler movie. But she's kind of been in a trance almost by Aphrodite, I gather, right? All of a sudden she's come to her senses and realizes she still has affection for her husband of old, you know, and she's got a child who's now full grown. She missed out on her son's childhood,
Mm,
and it's kind of like she's come to her senses and realizes I've missed it. You know, I've missed my husband and my child, and I'm here with this poor excuse of a man. He's a coward. How did I get here? You
yeah.
know.
Yeah, Paris is going to show his head again in the coming books, particularly I've already mentioned it, book 6, with Hector pitted up against Paris. But I'm just now thinking too, I wonder if Homer has structured this intentionally so that we get a glimpse into Helen's motherhood with her with her son that she abandoned, and then when we come back later to Hector and we see a man who is faithful to his wife, he's a loving father to his son,
Mm,
and that's in direct contrast to his pitiful brother Paris and his adulterous wife Helen, who has forsaken her husband and has forsaken her own son. So, I mean, like in my mind, this just confirms. Um, it's just another example of a human being made in the image. I'm talking about the author now, who sees a real beauty
mm,
and a wholesomeness to the nuclear family with a husband and a wife and a child. Helen is lamenting something real and something that she ought to lament. The abandonment of of her other self, really her husband and the offspring of of her
right.
offspring. And Homer, I think, I mean, I I think he wants us to feel that and to see Paris as what not to not to be like him, but to be like Helen. If you find yourself in a situation like Helen, you should be weeping warm tears as she is looking over at the armies and she's remembering
Hmm.
what she's lost and what she's caused. And
Right.
I think it's a picture of a kind of repentance that's admirable.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to show that um, marriage is kind of it's something that's been since the garden in the beginning, and
Mm,
a good man treats his wife well and guards her and certainly doesn't uh, take another man's wife, right? And so there is some of that coming through here. We love Hector. Everyone loves Hector. Hector's feared by the Greeks, loved by the Trojans, and no one loves Paris except Aphrodite. You know, uh,
yeah.
and so um, there's there is this perhaps recognition of a common grace recognition that marriage and virtue, these are good things, and actually they go together, and Paris will have neither of them, you know.
Mm, Yeah.
And
It's almost like a
uh,
warning for us as well.
yeah,
Like,
say more.
well, I was just thinking, well, I had a few thoughts kind of rapid fire as we're kind of wrapping up here, but
Yeah,
just at, at what point can we discern certain imperatives that an author wants to communicate in a book or a poem like this without directly communicating them? Because it's, for example, it's really clear that we ought not view Paris in a positive light.
yeah,
But does that necessarily mean that Homer is saying, hey, reader or listener at the time, don't be like him? Mm, maybe.
yeah. I would think so.
Yeah.
I think the heroic stories, you know, they put the exemplary on display, positively and or negatively.
Yeah, it reminds me of a chapter that N.T. Wright wrote in a small little book on scripture. They that went through like a couple editions, I think. But basically, one
Mm,
of the first chapters is about it asks the question, how can a story command our lives? He establishes
yeah,
that the scriptures are fundamentally a story. And then he says, well, the scriptures also command you. And so, how
yeah.
can a story command you? And I thought that's very profound because that applies not just to the Bible, but to other works of literature as well. Um, just which I could go on and on about some of the things that we've talked about in my classes. But um, Devin,
Yeah. Go
where
ahead.
we could go on and on. So
Hmm.
I think I've got in my mind a better kind of picture in my mind about perhaps why Homer may have put Paris and Helen next to one another.
Mm.
Uh,
In a word, what is your
oh, in one
what
word.
what what? Well, or in a couple
Oh,
words,
okay, here we
what's your
go.
what's the clarity you've gained here?
um, well, in a couple of words, let's just say two words. Ready? Family matters. I don't think before even recording what we're recording
Mm.
right now, I had put together the whole familial piece. I had an idea of glory and honor being um bound up in what Paris lacks and what Helen wants, but I
Mm.
hadn't but I hadn't thought about family and Paris
Yeah.
lacking what he originally sought out to achieve and really what kind of Aphrodite low key promised him.
Mm.
Uh, but Helen really turning around and desiring ultimately that which she should have kept on to, which was her husband and her son, and she's lost it.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
un-
that's good.
well, she's lost it until Menelaus comes and gets her. Uh,
Yeah,
so if that
presumably,
if
yes.
if that ever happens, you gotta wait till book 24. Actually, even then, it doesn't. You don't really know.
Spoiler alert! My goodness.
You got to read the Odyssey and maybe a few more Greek works to figure it out.
But yeah, it's
Anyways,
interesting because uh, it matters for Hector and Priam's family generally, but not Paris. And it now matters for Helen, and it seems to have mattered for Menelaus, who came for her, right? But and has been fighting for her for 9 years. But there are plenty of. I mean, Agamemnon doesn't seem to care as much. Odysseus certainly does.
mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
this seems like it's a mixed bag on both sides. But the admirable characters, the characters that I believe Homer wants us to, be interested in, to root for, they are they're they're family people.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. 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 So I know we got to go, but the whole war is uh, begins because of a family problem. Wife is stolen,
Mm-hmm.
and this idea of family, husbands, wife, children, Thetis, Achilles, Menelaus is going to get Helen. Helen's with a false husband. Priam and his son, especially as we get towards the end. And then when we get to the Odyssey, it's all about families being reunited. So I wonder, at
Yeah,
least in my mind right now, I'm thinking,
that's
okay,
right.
I need to keep this concept of family in my mind as we keep reading through the Iliad, and then especially as we progress into the Odyssey.
Yeah,
So
it will look a little different. I mean,
yeah.
it's more about loyalty than it is about
Mm.
exclusivity. I mean, but yeah, so it's not entirely Christian, but the overarching theme is there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man. Man, you know what we need right now?
what's up?
We need we need our good buddy Micah to come in and just kind of just take us away, like shroud us in a mist, like Aphrodite did, and just like take us to a cloud with some really chill, jazzy version of a famous hymn, and to kind of take us away, as we
Kind
go
of
through
like the
this.
one we did last time.
Oh, that'd be a great idea. That'd be a great idea.
uh,
Let's call him up.
all right, Micah, shred.
Take it away.
All right, signing out.
Signing out.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.